aircrafts.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, don't sound like that.
Well,
I know you love aircraft.
So here's another air crash story. But if you don't have one of them, controlled flight is impossible.
Oh my God. When the pilot says, maybe I'll fly this upside down. Okay.
It went from 2,000 hours to nearly 10,000 hours. You can justify it, right? Because it's within the rules. Every single one of those decisions made sense in isolation. But when you put them all together, it was drift towards disaster.
Welcome to Anecdotally Speaking, a podcast to help you build your business story repertoire. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Callahan.
And hey, everybody, I'm Mark Schenk.
Well, we've got a story to be told. Mark, I believe you have something in the world of aircrafts.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, don't sound like that. I know you love aircrafts.
I do. I spent 20 years in the Air Force, so I'm a bit taken by aircraft and all things. But I also realized that we recently, a few months ago, did a podcast episode on the Boeing 737 MAX
debacle.
Disasters. Debacle. And so here's another air crash story, but like it's one that I think's got some really good lessons for us, particularly about how it's easy to make decisions in isolation. And there's an aircraft that crashed. There was a commercial airliner, a McDonnell Douglas 80 MD-80 aircraft, very, very widely used throughout the world. Yeah. And 31st of January. In the year 2000, so just after the turn of the millennium.
Yeah.
This aircraft was operated by Alaska Airlines, so it was Alaska 261. It was flying from Mexico to Seattle via San Francisco. And it's on the first leg from Mexico to San Francisco, flying off the coast of California. And the pilots report a sudden loss of control of the tailplane. Now, the tailplane is... It's technically called the horizontal stabilizer, and it's the thing that allows the aircraft's nose to move up and down. It's how you control. And if you don't have one of them, controlled flight is impossible.
But you could go left and right.
Yes, you could. Yes, you could fly into the ground left or right. But, and so and that's good. So it's called pitch. Moving the aircraft up and down is pitch. So they could still yaw, which is left and right, and they could still roll, which is, as the name implies, but they couldn't control up and down. So the pilots, the aircraft eventually crashes into the ocean off the coast of California. There was 83 passengers, 5 crew, everyone was killed. And it took them months to get the aircraft pieces out of the ocean and figure out what went wrong. And what went wrong was that there's a very important piece of the aircraft called the jack screw that allows that tailplane to move up and down. And it had failed. It had first failed it failed in a major way, but wasn't a complete failure. So what had happened was that the jack screw, the nut was threaded, so it just kind of slid up the jack screw up to against the stopper, and so they were plunging downwards. The pilots found that eventually they could fly the aircraft upside down, but then it failed completely. And anyway,
imagine being the passengers in that aircraft. Oh my God! When the pilot says, maybe I'll fly this upside down. I like that Denzel Washington movie.
Yeah.
That would be the freakiest. Oh my God. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah. So the investigation reveals that it was a very common category of failure, which is mechanical failure caused by poor maintenance.
Right.
In essence, the jack screw had not been lubricated, and that jack screw needed to be lubricated in order for it. It's flight critical and undergoes a huge amount of friction and wear, and without lubrication, bad things happen, as happened in this. Now, this is so critical. Yep, go on.
I'm going to ask, how big's this jack screw?
Jack
screw. What are we talking about?
Yep. Sure. Think of a pick handle, like the handle of a Matic.
Yep. Yeah. Right. So about that size.
It's pretty substantial. It's not
It's not a little screw.
Not something they use to hang up a picture in your house.
Right. Okay. I'm getting it. Okay. Yeah, good. Thank you.
It's a big bit of kit. And it's so critical that when it was first released into service in the mid 1960s, the manufacturer, McDonnell Douglas, their recommendation was that the jack screw needed to be lubricated every 300 to 350 hours. Now, over time, decisions were made that increased that maintenance interval. Now, and there's a good reason for that, right? If you need to lubricate that part every 300 flight hours, like if you're running an airline, that's every 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And so they got approvals to extend that lubrication interval so that it would fit with their maintenance schedules, right? So, you do an A service, which is a minor service, very regularly. You do a B service, which is an intermediate level service, less frequently. And then a C service is a major overhaul, and you do that every couple of years, right? So they just spread the stuff through this. Anyway, over the course of the next, nearly 35 years, right? The maintenance interval for lubricating that jack screw went from 300 hours to, 2,550 hours.
Wow.
So 300 to 2,550, nearly an order of magnitude.
Yeah.
Increase in the maintenance interval for that. Now, every single decision that increased the maintenance interval in isolation could be justified and approved. And by the way, that 2,550 hours, that was approved by both the manufacturer and the FAA, right? So it's not like Alaska did anything wrong in this.
And probably up to that point, they hadn't had any problems with their jack screws.
Yeah. In fact, look, the other interesting sidebar to this was that a few years after the aircraft was introduced, McDonnell Douglas realized that is, that part is so critical, and it was wearing faster than they had expected. They introduced a new check. It was called an end play check, and that was meant to be done every 2,000 flight hours. It just measures the amount of play, which is a direct kind of, it measures the wear on the thread. And when the thread wear got to a certain point, you had to replace the part, right?
Yeah,
completely. Only difficulty is that end play check underwent the same kind of process as
of increasing time.
Yes,
right.
Yes. So
okay.
It went from 2,000 hours to nearly 10,000 hours.
Oh my God!
Right. So, and weirdly, this is really sad. At the last major service that the end play check had been done on that aircraft, which is a couple of years, nearly not quite 2 years before the crash, the level of wear was at the maximum, right? So,
and they didn't change it.
Yeah, they didn't change it. So you could have the amount of but it's like you can justify it, right? Because it's within the rules. The allowable amount of wear was between 0.01 and 0.04 millimeters. Can't remember. And it was at 0.04, exactly 0.04. If it had been 0.041, no choice. You've got to throw it away, put a new one in. But it was 0.04. Anyway, you get the idea. That decision you could justify locally, right? Because it is legally within limits. But of course, anyway, it's going to be a couple of more years before you do that check. Yeah. So one of the lessons from this that I look at this and I go, wow, like every single one of those decisions made sense in isolation, but when you put them all together, it was drift towards disaster. And this can happen so often in business. We make a decision today that seems quite, we can justify that decision today, but it leads you towards a path where bad stuff's going to happen. So, just a very useful illustration that, yes, you might be able to justify this decision today, but you need to look at the long term as well. What's the big picture?
Yeah, exactly. And Yeah, you sort of see it play out in all sorts of ways. You see it play out in things getting more and more complex in an organization, right? Because almost like, oh, we have to stop that happening and this happening, and they add this rule and that rule. Next thing you think, it's a little bit different to what you're talking about. You're talking about this idea of, checking, not getting slack, I suppose, is the underline for this. Keep up that level of, sort of focus on making sure it's working properly.
Now, I think it is relevant to what you were saying there about, having, something happens in an organization, you introduce a new rule and you think, oh, that's, but humans are such complex, we're so complex that every time you introduce a new rule, you change, behaviors potentially change. I remember sitting in a leadership program where we were looking at the culture of an organization, and a whole bunch of stories, examples.
Yeah.
On the walls. So like it was 50 odd examples, 25 good ones, 25 bad ones, 25 examples of things we want to stop, 25 examples of things we want to see more of. And you immersed all the leaders in the stories. They read them, they figure out what's going on. And then I asked the question, which is, what did you notice? And there was one particular leader who did not engage in the conversation, a really senior guy. Yeah. Did not engage in the conversation. And I was going to, I have to call this. Because he's really having an impact on people's engagement in this, because he's totally not focused on the conversation. He's just swiveling his chair around, looking at the wall, at all the anecdotes on the wall. And I'm thinking, okay, Mark, call him, senior guy in the room.
Yeah.
But then he turned around and he said, so Mark, that's a great question. What did you notice? And I'll tell you what I noticed. I noticed a whole bunch of terrific examples where principles and values have been well applied. And I see a whole bunch of really bad examples where rules have been applied. And I'm just sitting here thinking, man, we got so many rules causing bad behavior. We need more principles and values that help guide good behavior.
And you were happy you didn't intervene then.
I was very happy that I didn't. Listen, you.
Yeah. Speak up now.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly insightful.
Yeah. But yes. I love it. How would a value? So, that the jack screw maintenance is really a rule-based thing.
Yeah.
How do you change that to be more of a principle or value-based thing? And would that make a difference? Some things are actually more useful to be rule-based?
Safety is our top priority.
Right.
Would be, and if you followed that, then you would look at that end play test result of 0.04 and you go, can't have that.
No.
Safety is our first priority. We're replacing that jack screw now. That aircraft's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So that jack screw, right? But it wasn't the value. The value was efficiency and cost saving.
Yes. That's so interesting.
And so according to the rule, they could make that decision. So
I remember doing some work for one of the big food manufacturers, and we're up in Singapore working with them on their strategy story. And this, just thinking about safety, a safety value or a safety mindset. So this fellow was from Scandinavia, but he was visiting a plant in Asia Pacific, and he was walking through this plant, and there was a valve that let off steam at pressure that was more or less head height as you walked through this particular factory. And they had really dangerous gases and stuff like that into these massive tanks and whatnot. And he immediately saw that and went, actually, this is a danger. If this goes off while someone's walking past it, it's more or less steam right into your head. And so he more or less made the call, and he's not the top level guy, made the call to close down the plant. Right? Anyway, he thought for sure this was like a career-defining moment.
Yeah.
And he did talk to his manager first, and his manager said, "Yep." So anyway, the head of safety got in contact with him immediately and said, "You've done the right thing. and then the CEO got in contact with him, you've done the right thing. And they fixed it up, and it was, a safer plan. So, I mean, there's an organisation that really is acting in that value-based approach to these types of maintenance issues. But it's interesting how a company like an aircraft company, which you would think, or, like a commercial airline, has, lost that. And we've seen it. This is a pattern, isn't it? When a new owner comes in often, and, they're trying to wring a little bit more profit out of the system. And, I got a feeling we're seeing a little bit of this happening in our carrier of Qantas at the moment, where they're outsourcing, all of this sort of activity around maintenance. Who knows exactly what's going on, but as an outsider's perspective, you get a bit of a feel for that might be happening. Anyway,
and
just hope not.
If this is happening in an airline industry where the results are catastrophic, they're horrific and catastrophic, if you get it wrong, in much less high stakes places in companies where it's not so, when things go bad, it's not so visible.
Yeah.
Not so visible publicly, perhaps. That it's so much easier to justify decisions that aren't in accordance with your values, or you do the easy thing rather than the right thing.
Yeah. Now let's go back to the story, right? Well, I mean, in telling that story, and I can tell it's right down your interest area. There's lots of detail you can tell. Like normally people would be able to say, have an A service and a B service and a C service, no, you have to be in that world to understand that. But what did you like in telling in that story? What are the things that really excite you when you recounting?
Nothing excites me about the story.
Yeah, exciting, right? The right word. Not devastating story, but yes.
Yeah. Well, look, I can just the picturing, mental picture of that jack screw failing and the horizontal stabilizer, the tailplane just flapping about like in the breeze, uncontrolled. But that's very vivid for me, right? So
yes, yeah.
But again, that's because that world is very familiar to me.
Mm. Do you know how long they were in the air with that problem?
The time between kind of the first indications, it was a few minutes.
Oh, only a few minutes, right? I was just wondering whether the crew were battling against that problem. But they only had a few minutes to battle.
Yeah, I don't know whether I mentioned, but they ended up figuring out that by flying the aircraft upside down, they regained a measure of. I mentioned that because it was
yes.
They embraced that in the 2014 Denzel Washington movie called Flight. Now it's very loosely based,
right? Very loosely, yeah. Because when I saw the movie, I went, "Yeah, right. This is not happening."
Yeah. Particularly the bit where he crashes in the field, and most
everyone
people survive.
Yeah. No, it's. I think it's a life and death story. So that is definitely compelling in listening to it, and it's a story of greed. It's a story of I don't know. There's a whole bunch of missed opportunities for the maintenance of that aircraft. I think, and the flying upside down. I mean, that's a something that stands out as very unusual. I think it's good to actually be able to. I like your Matic description of the jack. Gave me when I first heard the idea of a jack screw, I had no idea how big this thing was. Was it a little screw? Was it? I knew it couldn't have been a little screw, but I didn't know. Okay, what is the size of this thing? So that was good. That helped.
Yeah, it's a big, heavy, very strong.
That's right. So yeah, I think that all those things, sort of give us a good story to tell. And in terms of, I guess, telling it, like things that could make it even better. I wonder in some ways whether knowing too much actually makes for a more complex telling of that.
I think absolutely it does.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because I was sort of thinking of the pub version of that story, right? You know, oh, did you hear about the flight that sort of ditched into the water? Everyone died. 88 people died. But it was, they lost control because of just this one screw that wasn't maintained. And I don't know. I'm just wondering if if you knew less, it'd be the sort of story that you could tell in, a few minutes, I think. But it's always the case, as soon as you know more, you love telling them the whole story.
And as I think about it, this is probably a story that's more suited to making a major point, kind of using it as a central part of a presentation rather than an anecdote that you might share in a meeting or in a at the pub.
Yeah.
And the business point as well, is more suited to a more, I don't know.
It's like a story you would tell to a major project. Yeah, it's almost like a cautionary tale, especially if the project has a safety element to it, right? And you're trying to get across to that project team, we can't just let things slide. We can't let it go from 300 flight hours to 2,000 flight hours. Even though, on a day-to-day basis, it seems okay, And I think that additional story you told about the values and principles versus the rules, to me, that's, that's I don't know. It's as equally as good a story as the flight story.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So, because I think that's such an important point, isn't it? Trying to get people to move to the values and principles. Cool. Well, now, in terms of, we sort of touched on how you would use this, right? But is there any other places that, that you would imagine using that story?
Well, picking up on the safety thing, there are many industries where safety is very important, like mining, any kind of primary industry. So a very useful story in any of those circumstances where safety is a major concern.
Yes.
So, but I guess I'm just focusing on a kind of a sector. The business point is really about safety and making decisions based on principles rather than rules.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Are we ready to give it a score?
Yep.
Are we at that point?
I'm ready to score.
Ready to score. Well, I think the story for me is a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
I think I need to know more about that industry to be able to tell that story really well. Mind you, I give you 8 out of 10 for the values and principle versus, versus the rules story.
You're not making me feel any better here.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. What do you reckon? What are you going to give it, Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 6 as well. And, that's functional story in a very specific application, but I can't imagine, because one of the things that we decide the score on is its utility, how easy,
how often you're going to tell it.
How often you're going to tell it. And I probably wouldn't tell this one that often, although I definitely going to have it in my story bank, and I'll be flinging it. I'll be anyone. I know a bunch of people who are in the safety world, and I'll ping this episode of the podcast to them, just so that they've got yet another story in their kit bag to use to illustrate some of the key points around safety.
Nice one. Very good. Well, thanks everyone for listening in to Anecdotally Speaking. And tune in next week where we have another story for you, another episode on how to put your stories to work. Bye for now. Anecdotally Speaking was engineered by Dave Stokes from Author to Audio.